What is life? Why am I here? How is it all connected? And how am I going to navigate this beautiful but crazy journey? I'm Sylvia and welcome to the Soul Sunshine Podcast. Today I'm talking to Victoria Maurer. Victoria is an ex-corporate consultant turned life coach and master breathwork coach to high-performing women. She is also a group exercise instructor and has a huge passion for empowering women to reach their full potential while connecting to and living in alignment with the truest version of themselves. Having experienced it herself during a decade-long career in corporate America as well as Australia, Victoria truly knows what's needed to live a balanced life. Her coaching takes a holistic approach to creating more energy for her clients and includes the integration of sustainable strategies from mindset and breathwork to movement and nutrition. Victoria is an overall super inspiring and epic human, and I'm so excited to finally have her here with me. Welcome to the Soul Sunshine Podcast, Victoria.
Thanks
so good to have you.
Sylvia. So excited to be here and grateful for our friendship and excited to have this conversation.
Same, yeah, it's been a long time coming, so we're finally here, which is awesome. So before we are heading into our conversation today, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So today we are talking about Victoria's story. We are talking about her former life as a corporate girl and how overworking and climbing the corporate ladder ultimately left her disconnected from herself as well as close to burnout. We are uncovering the turning point of her choosing a different path and how she ended up becoming a holistic health and mindset coach who is supporting others on their journey. We dive deep into healing, growth, and what it ultimately means to live a balanced life true to yourself. I'm honestly so excited to have you here today because when I'm thinking back of when we met, was it 3 years ago?
Yeah,
I think it was about 3 years ago. You were still in your corporate career and this was all a bit of a dream of yours, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When we met, I was finishing up my first round of my 6-month sabbatical period. And I had done my cycling coach certification, and then I did neuro-linguistic programming, which is the course we met on, of course.
Which is where we met,
and my holistic health coaching, and I remember it.
Same, yeah. And I remember you, I'm pretty sure you started your Instagram page.
I did.
During the course.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just really exciting to see you starting to put your things out there, and fast forward 3 years and we're having this conversation, which is so awesome.
Yeah, it is a bit like time flies, but also 3 years sounds like a long time, but so much has happened in that time since. And obviously, I was still at PwC at the time and actually really quite enjoying my time at PwC at that time after I'd kind of realized and found a way to work more in balance and do all of that while, still feeling like I was achieving in my corporate job, but then also getting to know myself better and what was important to me. So the start of the journey. Interesting.
Yeah, it really was, wasn't it? So for our listeners though, Victoria, take us back a little bit further, tell us a little bit about your background, like what's your story?
Yeah, so I started my career at PwC in New York in 2013, and I don't really know that I ever really wanted to do accounting and finance, but I always knew I would get a good job doing that, so that's kind of how I ended up there. And I really was always super passionate about well-being and growing teams and developing the people who worked with me and worked for me, and I got to work with whether they were clients or they were actually people on my teams. So I spent a lot of my time doing well-being stuff on the side of the financial assurance and consulting. And when I was in New York, all I did was work, to be honest. And that's kind of all I knew. It was like everyone was doing it. We thought it was normal. And I also had a lot of fun at the same time because some of my best friends, even today, I've been in a few weddings of girls that I worked with at PwC back in New York. One of my best friends even now lives here in Sydney. So when we were doing those 2, 3, 4 a.m. nights, I would remember we would be playing music and eating Sour Patch Kids and drinking Monster. And it was just like, this is kind of normal. This is what everybody does. Yeah, you get so wrapped up in it. And I think the culture in New York is definitely a little bit different to Sydney, where it's like, well, if I don't do it, someone else will do it. And if they do it, then I'll lose my spot. So that was kind of the mindset that I had. And I was super intense about everything. I was, if it wasn't Barry's or really hard hot yoga, I didn't want it. If it wasn't, a green smoothie and a salad, I didn't want to have it. And then of course there was, drinking and going out on the weekends and doing things like that as well to kind of counterbalance.
Yeah, was that intensity as you describe it, and like doing everything to that maximum, was that something that was instilled in you, like that was kind of conditioned into you, or where did that come from?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I probably picked it up when I was much younger. I used to do Taekwondo competitively, and whilst it taught me a lot of discipline and, kept my fitness really high and things like that, it was definitely something that was pretty intense, and it kind of showed me that I had that intensity in me. And when I accessed that intensity, I could do really well. So I kind of put that approach into my school, and then ended up getting really good grades, and then ended up getting a scholarship to university, doing my MBA, graduating early, going on and moving into PwC and getting early promoted and doing all those things. And I kind of, that's the path that I ended up on, and it was working well for me until it wasn't.
So the intensity was really kind of equaling success, right?
Yeah, it was rewarding. And it also just seemed like the people that I was surrounded with were doing the same thing. So it felt like we were in it together. So that, because I've always been someone who's craved connection and community. So I was able to find connection and community in those spaces with people who had a like-minded mindset that I did at that time. And, and now that has, and we'll get there, I'm sure we're going to get there, I'm sure, but now that has completely shifted to kind of a different community and what connection actually means to me now. So yeah, as far as it, I think it's always conditioned into us or instilled into us. And I mean, I know you talk a lot about human design, a lot about human design. I'm a projector. I was never meant to really be on that path. And when I was at PwC, even if we're still talking about in New York, and when I finally got the opportunity to come to Australia, I had the chance to come for 3 months, and I came and I loved it. And I worked for this amazing partner who was originally from New York, and I worked for her here, and she said, come back for 2 years, you'll love it, you'll never regret it. So I thought, when will I get the chance to live in Australia again? I don't really love New York. I never really felt settled there. I think I always felt I have to be doing something. So whether I'm working out, or I'm out to dinner, or I'm out to a show, or I'm at the office working, or I'm doing something, I never really knew what it was to enjoy my life. And when I had those 3 months here in Sydney, I noticed that people here enjoy their lives. And the first weekend I ever worked here in Sydney, the partner actually said to me, thank you so much for coming in. I'm actually so embarrassed you have to work the weekend. Whereas that was never the case. That was never the case in New York. There was we never even thought about not working the weekend during busy season. You didn't even have to ask us. We were going to be there. So it was kind of like, oh, wow, okay, people, when you take time off, you don't have to answer your emails and actually get up before work and go to the beach. And I started ocean swimming, and I started cycling and doing all those things. And I kind of felt like, oh, wow, I was born to be a Bondi gal. This feels so much more well suited to me, and kind of started exploring different avenues of what actually it means to enjoy life and not just constantly chase external validation. And
but
then
you
kind
were
of
still in that corporate career, right?
Still in that corporate career. Yeah. And I think coming here, I really started to hone in on the skills that I really enjoyed more, which was developing the teams, working with people. I really, really, even to this day, truly love all of the juniors that ever worked for me or with me, and my peers that I worked with. I had some really amazing relationships with people at PwC. And I think that's why I stayed so long. And I think, it's not the first time someone will say this, you stay for the people. It wasn't necessarily because I loved digging through hundreds and hundreds of pages of financial reports. It was because I enjoyed working with the people there. So in a sense, I kind of, looking back now, I'm able to say I was probably always meant to be a coach in some capacity, because that's where I was most interested in and where people saw the most value in me.
Even while you were in that work, right?
Yeah.
So coming to Australia, and realizing that there is also other things but work, and living a bit more of a balanced lifestyle already by moving to Bondi and living here and using it for what it's so amazing for. Like, what was that turning point though at the end that really made you want to leave this former life behind, and actually
it kind of happened slowly. There is an exact moment I always talk about, which was during our first lockdown in March 2020. And that was like, I was working at 2 a.m, which was quite normal during a busy season. I was on the phone with a partner at the time who I was working for, and one of my CFOs and my roommates and partner were asleep at the time. And I normally would have been in the office surrounded by a bunch of other people doing it. So it might have just skated by me. I had also just started practicing Vedic meditation 3 months prior. So I kind of had that extra little bit of awareness. Plus I had that cold, dark living room sitting all alone. And those two things then created the perfect storm of, actually, I don't want this life. I don't want to be, that doesn't even look good to me. The thing that I had been chasing for so long, which was to be a partner, was actually, which for many people is an amazing goal to have. And a lot of clients that I work with now, that is their goal, and you can support that goal and have a healthy and balanced lifestyle. But for me, it was probably never the thing that I wanted. It was just the thing that I ended up chasing. And I kind of then had this even scarier moment at the time where I thought, well, if I don't want to make partner, then what do I want? And I actually didn't know. So it was like, at that point I was at PwC for about 7 years, and I stayed for another 3. Beyond that, didn't know what else outside I'd want. I had already invested 7 years. I had an MBA in accounting and finance. I had a CPA that I worked so hard for, and I can see how this can happen for people. And it was at that moment, well, you've invested all this time already. You're so close. I was almost a senior manager at that point. What else are you going to do? And I actually decided in that moment to start to figure out what actually makes me happy. And that's when I really doubled down on my own personal growth, which led me to the neuro-linguistic programming certificate that I did, the holistic health coaching certificate that I did. And when I first did those, I thought, well, I've always been super passionate about this stuff, but I'd like to have something to back it up. Like, I know a lot about these things already. It's something I'm applying in my life day to day, but I'd like to have something that is actual real education. And then that kind of led me to realize, oh, maybe this is something that you want to do kind of more holistically. I got really into ocean swimming and road cycling, and I met a bunch of really amazing people in that process who I was able to connect with. And, we were having so much fun, and it just felt like getting up at 5 a.m. to go and do those activities meant that I had to go to bed at a certain time. So I wasn't then working crazy late anymore. And I had kind of shifted my mindset in a way. And the one sentence that sticks out for me was, that's not my prerogative. So, because I think something that I struggled with for a really long time, and I know a lot of other people struggle with, is, well, if everyone else is doing it, then how can you not? You're not a team player.
That's
right?
what I was just going to say as well, and especially because you're saying the thing that you were chasing this whole time suddenly didn't seem that appealing anymore the closer you came to that, right? And it is that getting caught up in other people's dreams and chasing their dreams, right? Rather than looking at what do I actually want and what am I here to do, because everybody else around me is doing this, so I'm supposed to do that as well.
Yeah, so it was like that realization. And then when I would see other people, staying in the office, and I'd finally gotten to a point, I was 7 years in at this point, finally gotten to a point to say, oh, I'm not staying, because one, that's not my prerogative anymore. If that's your prerogative, you chase it, you go for it, that's great for you, but it's not mine. And also I was able to see the value that I brought was different to the value that they were bringing. So, my specialty or my thing that I really wanted to bring to the team was energy, high vibe, all of those things. And all those things that I wanted to bring, I needed to take care of myself before I could do that. And it didn't make sense for me to continue to work in that way. So I had to find a way that worked well for me. And I was still performing. I was top rated. I got promoted. It was all happening. It just actually seemed so much easier. And that's kind of what I do now with my clients, is say, you don't have to stop chasing your dreams. If you want to make partner at a law firm or an accounting firm, or you want to be a CEO or whatever you want, but you have to take care of yourself first. And I think what ends up happening is people think, well, I'll take care of myself later when I get there. And that's kind of how I used to think too. It was like, well, once you make partner, then everything will open up and be amazing. But actually that's not true. It's just you've created this pattern for yourself of caring for yourself last, and it only gets harder and harder and harder as you go further and further. One, because you're not learning the skills and making time for it in your life, and two, because your life just gets busier. So the further you go down that track, the harder it gets.
And really, they're the stories that we're telling ourselves, right? It's this whole, I think it's generally with achievements, it's always like, if I do this, or if I get there, then I'll be happy, or then I'll be fulfilled, or then everything will be okay. Meanwhile, like, it doesn't matter if it's work or if it's something materialistic, or even if it's sometimes a holiday, it doesn't actually turn out to be like that. So it's the exceeded expectation that we're putting onto things that's never really being able to be met.
Exactly. And I think that I love that concept, and I think it's twofold. One is, I think the first part, which we've already touched on, is people chase things they don't actually want because they think it's going to give them something that they want. But how do you know if it's going to give you what you want if you don't really know what you want? And actually answering that question is not very easy. It's not something you just sit down for 5 minutes and meditate and, got it, that's what I want.
Yeah.
And some people have that clarity, but not many people. So I think there are a lot of people who I see really beat themselves up for not knowing, but then they're sometimes too scared to look. And it's just a bit easier to just keep following this path until eventually it's not. And then the second thing is whenever you're looking for something outside of yourself, no matter what it is, it's not going to last for long.
Yeah.
So it's like focusing more on how you want to feel rather than the thing that you're going to achieve, which sounds easy in theory. I totally get it. But actually in practice, it's quite difficult.
Yeah. I was going to say exactly the same thing. It's really about like how you want to feel at the end of the day, right? And what your life should be looking like at that point rather than just chasing for the sake of achieving something.
Yeah, exactly. The moment in time is, I would say, that March 2020, alone in my living room. But then I carried on 3 more years at PwC, went through some really stressful regulatory reviews, and that just kind of further solidified my decision. That's when I decided to have the 6 months off, and I went and did my holistic health coaching, all the certifications that I did. And
so
then
you
I had another...
So after, sorry, just to slow it down for a second. So you quit at PwC.
No, I stayed.
You stayed with them?
Yeah, I stayed with them.
No, but you quit and then you took 6 months off. Or you stayed?
No, I stayed with them and I took a sabbatical.
You took a sabbatical.
Okay,
because I couldn't remember how. I remember you taking the 6 months, but I couldn't remember if you quit before. So that was still within PwC.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing too, is you can always make your corporate career work for you.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many different facets to this and so many different avenues we can come at this from. But it's, once you know what you want and how you want to live, you can make anything work for you.
Yeah.
Like, as long as you are clear about it, what it is that you want, and you communicate it. And I think for me, for a long time, I would have never thought that I could have asked for 6 months off, but I did, and it worked really, really well. And they made it happen for me.
Yeah.
And it was quite seamless. It was, took the time off, went back to the busy season, took the time off, went back to the busy season, and then I changed roles.
Yeah.
But I think there was this block in myself that was like, well, if you take that time off, you're going to fall behind your peers, and then so-and-so is going to get promoted before you, and you might get a lower rating. And it's like, but actually once all of that fell away and it didn't matter to me anymore, all that mattered to me was my development, my growth, my path, what's best for me. Can I make it work within the realms of this massive corporation? Actually, yes, I can. They have things like this. I just have to be kind of brave enough to ask for it. And then that's where it all started.
Yeah, it's interesting because that also really reminds me of, the stories that we're telling ourselves. You hear it all the time when people want to change jobs or something, and they're like, oh, I'll never find a job where I'm so flexible, or I'll never find a job where I have so much freedom, or I'll never find a job where I get a company car, whatever it may be, But it's not that they've actually tried and that they've actually gone out and asked the questions. It's just, it's almost like subconsciously you're scared to make a change, so you're just telling yourself that it's not possible anyway, because what you have is kind of easy and safe, and you know what you're doing, etc., etc.
Totally.
So that's kind of what comes up for me there as well.
Totally. Yeah, and I think again 2 parts to that. One is, a way to combat that is you can always go back. If you have it now, you'll always be able to get it again.
Exactly.
You can always go back. And then the second thing is, because we stay for so long in these situations, it becomes so much part of our identity that we actually don't build trust in ourselves to see what it's like elsewhere. And I think, people who are entrepreneurs or, doing things like that from a young age, they're constantly learning to trust themselves. But the longer we stay in something that's stable and consistent, the more we think, oh, well, how would I don't know how I'd be if I was like that.
Well, I think you get so caught up in an identity that's based purely on work and who you are at work and who you are in that role, rather than having an identity based on who you actually are as a person.
I think that's so true, and I think that's even more true in the US than it is here in Australia. And it could be because of the circles I run in here versus the circles I run in there, but it's the first question people ask you, oh, what do you do for work? And it's just kind of the easiest way for people to kind of say who they are and what they stand for. But something that changed a lot for me in the last couple of years, or really in the last, 2 years probably, is growth for me is no longer about achievement, learning, money, power, status, promotions, whatever. It's just seriously about how well I know myself.
Yeah.
How well do I know me, and how well do I take action based on how well I know myself? because I know that the better I know me, the better I can actually serve me, the happier I'm going to be. But for such a long time, I actually don't think I really knew myself, and I was just kind of telling myself I was supposed to be this way and telling myself I was supposed to do this, and never really invested that time. And I think there's some fear factor in people being like, well, what if I realize that actually everything I have is something I don't want, and I want something different? And that is quite a scary thing.
That is scary.
To say, oh, I've been doing all this for so long, I don't want to change it now. But I can totally resonate with that.
Yeah, and the thing you just said is the better you know you and the happier you are. But what you forgot to say is the better and the more purposeful you can also serve other people,
Absolutely.
right? Because that needs you to know who you are, know what you stand for, know what your purpose is, and then you can go out and you can actually create this really positive ripple effect in the world, rather than chasing something that you think you need to chase because everybody else is doing it. And yes, you might still be doing a good job, but are you really creating the impact that you want to create in the world, you know? And I also just want to mention that this is not like a slamming corporate work kind of episode.
No,
this is
the opposite.
Exactly what it really is. It's about finding your personal path that makes you happy, and for you it meant leaving corporate and going into coaching, you know, but for other people that might just mean climbing the corporate ladder, and that's exactly what they want to do, and that's exactly where they are happy. And then it's about how can we support those people to, you know, do that efficiently and purpose driven, and, you know, with balance in their lives.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to say that is my whole mantra, is you don't have to leave your corporate job to have a fulfilling, happy, balanced life. I had one for the last 3 years at PwC, and to be honest, for all my time at PwC, there was times where I could see the truck lights of burnout coming at me, and I'm glad that I was able to escape them. But once you're clear about what it is that you want, then you can deliver better for everyone that's involved. So
exactly.
And I think for me, the only reason I left PwC is because I really felt really strongly called to do this. It wasn't because I've got to get out of here. I hate it here. I hate the people. I hate the work. I actually had a really tough time leaving because I was loving the work that I was doing. I really liked the people that I was working with, but I had a stronger pull to do this instead. The women that I work with now, and lots of corporate teams that I work with now, is all about how can you actually become the best version of yourself, because when we raise the individual, we ultimately raise the collective. And I think a lot of corporations, because they don't know another way, or it's the easiest way or the most efficient way, or they feel like they always need to address the whole team. They need to, you know, we always need to think in a team. But actually, if you just go down another layer and you work on the individuals and let the individuals work on themselves, then you raise the collective and the team gets raised up anyway. But because we try, you know, these corporates try to come from a one-size-fits-all top-down rather than a bottom-up. You know, they have these well-being programs where they pay for your gym membership, or they give you a day off to volunteer, but actually to someone that might mean the world, but to someone that might mean absolutely nothing. So, and you're also then not giving the people the, autonomy to decide what actually matters for them. So then when you're trying to answer the question, you as the corporate are trying to answer the question, what matters for our people, you actually just need to ask them and let them tell you and let them figure it out, because that's the only way that it really works.
I love it when you're talking about that, because that's where my brain straight away goes to human design as well again, you know, and looking at like how different energies within different people work, and that whole like one size fits all approach is just so outdated and so not working, you know. So it's like, how can we support people individually and make sure that they are happy and that they are fulfilled and that they are on the path, because then that will help everybody else around as well, you know, like you said, then the team will automatically function better when that's happening.
When everyone's in their strengths. And I can remember when I was a senior at PwC in New York, and I was always doing the wellness stuff, always doing the connectivity stuff. I was really good at it. I really enjoyed it. Everybody was really happy with it. And, you know, someone said to me, yeah, you need to stop doing, you know, all of these kind of like red, yellow things with like the disc assessment, you know, you do those profiles. You're really good at that. You need to do more blue stuff, like analytical stuff. And I was like, well, I hate analytical stuff. I don't want to, but if I want to make partner of this accounting firm, I got to do analytical stuff. So I ended up taking on all of these super technical valuation roles where I was doing these like valuation of these crazy products. And I was like, gosh, I hate this. But that was, where I felt like I needed to build that weaker side. And, now I'm working with some corporate teams, and they're doing amazing stuff where they're doing the exact opposite. And they're saying, okay, what are your strengths?
Yeah.
What are your strengths that you're using? What are your strengths that you're not using? What are your strengths that you learned? So there are things you're good at, but like you learned those. They take a lot of energy from you. And then what are your weaknesses? What are you not good at? And they basically are saying, don't do those things that you learned to get good at that take your energy.
Exactly.
And those weaknesses that take your energy. Yeah. Let's do things that build your energy, because guess what? Tom, sitting across the table from you, has the exact opposite skill set. And to me, it just seems so basic and so profound that it's like, that's why you have teams.
Logical, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Because imagine you're having a team of like whatever 4 people and they all have the same skills.
Totally,
well, what are you going to do?
Totally.
Like you do need those specialists. Because it even reminds me of, children and how children are being taught. And I read that story a while ago where they're like, a child's like really good in German. Well, yeah, let's say German, whatever. Yeah. A child like, you're really good in German, but you're really not that great in maths. So what do people do? Well, they get them a maths tutor, It's like, well, why don't you get them a German tutor and actually, support that skill rather than, yes, you still have to, I guess, pass maths and that's fine, but it's always looking at what are people not as good at and how can we improve that rather than looking at the strength and going like, well, that's amazing that you're so great at that. How can we make you even better at that? And, support you in doing that in a more like elaborate way within an organization as well.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to an energy thing, and that's really a lot of the work that I do is how can you create more energy for yourself by doing more of the things that you love to do. The more you feel, when I was still at PwC and working at my best and feeling my best, I was doing a lot, but that's because I was creating so much energy for myself by exploring the things that really mattered to me, that then I was able to do the things that I didn't necessarily love or want to do. Yeah. Did I still have to review thousands of loan documents? Yes. Do I love doing that? Absolutely not. But I had to, horrible. Right? And let's be realistic, right? There are things, even now in my life, there are things I don't necessarily want to do, admin things and, all that kind of stuff. But as long as you create enough energy to do those things, they become quite easy and it feels good. But I think what ends up happening is people just hammer at the things that they're not that good at or don't want to do. And then they forget completely about, they don't leave space. Yeah. And something that I always found interesting was I would never skip the gym, even when I was working insane hours.
I remember that because you even went to the gym. I'm pretty sure every day during the course, and I was like, wow, that's real dedication.
Yeah. And I think it's, for me, because it's been a part of my life the whole time, so I don't want to just, brush over it as though, it's really easy because it's just been a part of my life. I've always been an athlete, and then I was, a bit of a gym junkie, sometimes too much of a gym junkie. But, I'd have a class booked with some other girls on my team, and we'd all be planning to go together, and 3 of the 5 would say, oh, I can't go, I've got to stay and write this memo or do this thing. I would never skip. And I think it's because I knew that was going to make me better in the end and give me more energy. But then there was, on the flip side, for other people, it's like, well, actually, it takes energy from them. Yeah. And I think that's a key thing too, is the things that give you energy might not be the things that give other people energy. So for me, it's the gym, it's ocean swimming, it's all these other things, and I know that. But for someone else, it might be reading a book or painting or dancing or cooking or, anything. And that's why it's really important to actually know yourself and what works for you, not like, okay, I'm going to get fit, so now I'm going to start running. Like, running might not be the thing for you. Maybe you need to find dance or Pilates, or maybe you actually exercise isn't the right avenue. It's more about what you put into your mouth. So it's getting super specific about what works for you. And I think spending time on that is worth people's effort.
So talk me through, and so that's when the Balanced Corporate was born. So talk us through your approach, and you've already kind of given us a few hints here and there of what you're looking at, but how do you approach a client, and what are the things that you're looking at?
Yeah, so I work with clients one-on-one and in group settings, and my next group coaching program will launch in March. And then I work with corporate clients in group settings and like corporate workshops and things. But when I work with a client one-on-one, the first thing we do is a full assessment. Like, this is where corporate Vic shines, super detailed. I want to know everything. And this is kind of like how you got to where you are. So what's going on for you? What's working? What's not working? What do you like? What do you not like? And then we from there can actually understand the story and how we ended up in this place, or how they ended up in this place. And then we can start to see how we're going to shift things. Then the next thing, it's going to sound super basic, but it's values alignment. And this was something that was quite shocking to me when I did it several years ago, was the values alignment, where I had all these values that I thought were mine. So the first one that comes to mind that was so unaligned for me was achievement. And it was like, well, yeah, of course achievement is my value. But that was just something that I had been given. You know, I think my parents, you know, nothing against them, but they really wanted to make sure that I would be successful. So then they showed me achievement was important. If I had got a 98 on a test, my mom would be like, good job, but why wasn't it 100? Why did you miss those 2 points? So what can you do better next time? You know, trying to make sure that, you know, we had a good life and set ourselves up for success in that way. But that was kind of what led me to live on this path where I was living in alignment with these values that weren't actually mine. So it takes quite a bit of time to actually figure out what the values are, and then understand how often you are or are not living in alignment with those values. And then that will start to explain the assessment piece of how you got to where you are in the first place. And it just kind of rounds it out in a nice way. And now that's our starting point.
Yeah, because it's interesting when you're saying it sounds basic, right? Because what we've just talked about before, it's like a lot of the time when you're in that space, in that headspace, you know, people don't actually know what they want. And, you know, you sometimes might not even know what you like, you know. It's like, well, what does give you energy? What do you like? I mean, I found myself in that space in the past, you know, where I'm like, I don't actually even know what I like to do anymore, you know. Or I don't actually even know what brings me joy anymore. So, yeah, when you have figured it all out, it might sound basic, but it is, like you said, it is a very, very important piece of the puzzle.
And I think even when I didn't know, I think I thought it was basic. If someone said to me, what are your values? I'd be like, achievement, success, this, that, the other, like, you know, just rattle it off. And then what happens when working with a coach, and this is what I do with my clients, is like, and they come to me, I'm like, okay, what are your 6 values? You know, we go from a huge list of like 50 or 60, and then I'll let them have 12, and then we'll break it down to 6. And it's like, okay, so what does this value actually mean to you now? And then they have to define it in their own words. Okay, so what does it feel like when you're living in alignment with that value? Okay, so what is your life going to look like if that's one of your core central values? Can you live without that value? What if it all of a sudden it falls away? And then they're like, oh, wait, hold on. Actually, that's not really what I meant. That's not actually really what, you know, a lot of people have freedom as a value, and then watching them define what freedom actually means to them is such a beautiful process, where it's kind of starts with, well, of course, you know, freedom. Yeah, I'm free to, you know, travel or leave the country, or I have, you know, like freedom from like in America, you know, I'm free country kind of perspective. But actually what freedom means to them is to be able to wake up when they want to and be places that they want to be at times that they want to be, but they haven't really gotten that specific. So they never really thought they valued freedom, because freedom is, oh yeah, of course I'm free. I live in a free country. But actually know, what is freedom really to you?
Yeah, super important. And I think it is something that where everything else gets based upon, right? Because once you know your values, you can go further in that exploration as well. So once you've got those values, what are the next steps that you're taking your clients through?
So it's really understanding how often or not you're living in alignment with those values. Sometimes people are living in alignment with those values without even realizing that they were their values. And sometimes they're really, really off par. And then it's all about kind of creating the vision for what it is you actually want. And that involves a lot of testing and exploration. And we go through various different exercises to kind of figure out what that actually looks like. And some people need a lot more prompting. Some people are quite clear about, I want to have this, I want to have that. And I've seen people completely, you know, not change their lives, but change the roles that they're working in and the way that they're doing things, and create more space for things that they love. And so I've seen some people figure out refined passions or find new passions for things that they didn't even know that they needed in their lives. So it's actually about just really getting clear about what does the life that you want to live, what does it look like? And let's be realistic about it. And I think then it's about creating the energy to make that life work. So it's getting super clear about what is taking your energy and what is giving you energy, and how are we going to balance those things out? Because we're going to be realistic. The things that are taking your energy, you probably can't get rid of all of them. If you're a senior manager at any kind of firm, or I've got some people who are running their own companies, you know, you can't just drop it and say, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to deal with this client. I'm not going to, you know, have this conversation with this underperforming staff of this sales team. You have to do those things. But how do we create you enough energy to be able to show up in that space as a better version of yourself? And then it's all about kind of from there unraveling their self-worth from their performance and their productivity. And this is probably the biggest one. And it's something that we end up conditioning ourselves into, which is when I'm performing and I'm doing well, I'm good. But when things are not going well and I'm not performing well, I'm bad.
Yeah.
And when we're not feeling good, there's definitely not enough energy for you. I mean, you've got this book here, Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins, and I love how he, explains from a scientific perspective what it actually is on a vibrational level to have those different feelings. Yeah. So if you're leaving a meeting where a client has just reamed you out and you're feeling quite shameful or guilty that you might have messed something up, your vibrational level is super low.
Yeah.
So we need to teach you strategies and find ways for you to get that back up to a higher vibrational emotion, gratitude, love, joy, something like that. But it's not super easy to shift. And we often don't give ourselves time to shift either. We go from one sympathetic or difficult, challenging, complex activity right into another, because that's the way that the world is structured. But I think for people to realize actually what works for them and build in those practices, that's when the magic starts to happen. And I think, things like breathwork are really good ways to shift your state in a fast kind of way. If you just take 5 or 6 minutes in between something to shift your state, then you can really move into the next thing from a more kind of effective standpoint.
What comes up for me when you talk about that as well, it's like when we do something well, we've achieved something, we've done something well. If we don't do something well, we've kind of failed. And I think we also do live in a society where failure isn't actually celebrated enough, because it's like, we can't always succeed. No. That's just not human. And especially I think if you have your own business, or if you have, if you're an entrepreneur, like they always say, fail fast, learn fast. And the quicker you fail, the quicker you can amend, pivot and move on, So like no failure is also often actually associated with you not trying things out and not giving things actually a go, Yeah. And I see how in an employment situation, might be a little bit harder to kind of look at that, but we are all human, and everybody fails sometimes, and it's okay, because at the end of the day, a lot of our biggest successes do often come out of the failures that we had to endure in order to get there,
Yeah, I think so. And I think that especially with high performers and people who end up in these like high paying corporate jobs, they put a lot of pressure on themselves. So oftentimes something that's a failure for them in their mind is actually not a failure by the standard of anyone else.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the place or the avenue or the practice ground or whatever you want to call it that we're actually playing in. The field we're playing on is, are you looking at failures in a realistic way or not? And how can you find value in things that are challenging for you? It doesn't need to be perfect all the time.
Yeah, that is such a good point as well, because what's failure to somebody might be like, oh my God, you've done so well, It's just even with sport, you look at people like coming second in the Olympics and they're really disappointed. Yeah. And I'm always like, shame, they came second, it's so good. But how are they disappointed?
Or even people who leave a meeting or a presentation that everyone thought they rocked, and they were like, you were so good. And like, they're standing there saying, thanks, but I missed this point or I missed that point.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it kind of goes back, if we circle back to that strengths thing, where we're all so conditioned to focus on where we went wrong, just because, and I think there's a lot of, in high performers especially, there's something in that, and I was definitely like this. If I'm kind to myself, I'll lose my edge. If I just sit here and I'm like, good job, Vic, you did amazing, and I see this in my clients too, that they're like, well, if I don't look at where I went wrong, how am I going to get better? And that's 100% a valid point. But doing it from a place of, I actually love myself and I want to get better, versus doing it from a place of
beating yourself up.
you messed up, or it's the same outcome but with a completely different energy. So instead of spending your energy on beating yourself up, you can spend your energy on building yourself up, being like, okay, I did that, I did such a good job, next time I'm going to do all these things even better. And then again, that's another energy management strategy, where we spend so much time circling and circling. I can't tell you how many times when I was corporate, or I see people creating scenarios in their head that aren't actually real, and it's like, okay, if you can just cut that energy off right now, how much more energy and headspace would you have to apply to other things? How much more energy and headspace would you have to go read a book or go make yourself a healthy snack, rather than speculating and worrying about things that haven't actually happened yet?
Yeah. I wonder if that, there must be so much of that goes back to conditioning and the way we've been raised as well. Because even, you talking about that example with your mom, and, you know, in the schooling system and everywhere we are, you know, it's always like looking at the failures and always like trying to point out what we've done wrong. And I do that very consciously with my children, you know. I never kind of look at what they've done wrong. I just celebrate the things that they've done right, you know, because I'm like, it's so much more important to me to bring that positive message across, because like we said, we're all human, we're all going to fail, and that's just normal, but celebrate the things that you've done really awesome, you know.
And also, like, can we just enjoy it?
Like,
there's not, can we trust that if we let ourselves enjoy life, we'll still do a good job? That's something that really resonates for me now, because it was like, well, if you're enjoying life, you're not working hard enough, or if you're, you know, you're slacking off, and if you're slacking off, then you're not reaching your full potential. But actually, you're just giving yourself the space, love, compassion, and energy to actually reach your full potential. And I think that that's something that that always kind of came up for me, which is, something just feels a bit off. I'm just worried I'm not going to reach my full potential. But I didn't know what that really meant. And now living in alignment, it's like, well, this is actually reaching your full potential, where you feel like I feel like I'm flowing more than I'm forcing. That's a huge thing that I focus on in myself and in my clients, is in any situation you're in, are you forcing it, or is that flow? What's easier? You know, and sometimes the path of least resistance is not the right answer, but for different reasons than just the fact that it's easy or hard. It's actually, there are so many signs for what you should be doing. And I think we just sometimes don't want to look. And I think for me, like if we go back to that March 2020, when I was in my living room, that was for the first time in my life, I picked my head up out of my laptop and thought, oh, there's other things happening. And then I started exploring and learning and thinking, and kind of ended up taking the steps to where I am now. And then, you know, we haven't talked about breathwork yet, but I did my first breakthrough breathwork in January of 2024. And that was just like 10x. Really sped up the process for me. I shed so many layers of myself that I didn't even know I had or didn't need, you know. And the way I describe it is kind of like armor that I had around me that was protecting me or showing me, or, you know, guiding me in a way that I thought I needed to be. You know, and when I did my first breathwork session, I actually did it with Johannes, who ended up being my teacher, at a PwC event, an amazing event that they put on a couple of years ago. And it was the first time in my life that I had no thoughts. And I thought, wow, breathwork, that's interesting. That was blissful. I had been meditating for 4 years at the time, but that was, you know, so I had transcended, and I have had this experience of no thoughts. And, you know, we do BMC together, Bondi Meditation Center together.
I found that so interesting when we had our pre-chat before this conversation, that, like, obviously having known you for the last couple of years and having seen the journey that you've been on, and, you know, all the different modalities that you've trained in, you know, with NLP, and you're doing meditation. And when you were like saying that breathwork really just kind of sped up the process like tenfold, that was like, I was like, wow, that really does say something, because I know how much you've been doing and how much self-work you've put in over the last couple of years, even before you started the breathwork journey.
And I think that's partly why, because I had done so much work on myself, that when I started doing the breathwork, it all just became super clear. But I've also seen, you know, that happen for people who maybe are just starting out their journey. And I think it's, breathwork for me is just a really quick and efficient way to connect to myself. So when I do a big breathe, or any kind of breakthrough breath work, or any kind of breath work, it's just my nervous system is so regulated in that moment that there's not all this outside chatter coming in. It's just, it's quiet, it's peaceful. And from that state, it's like, okay, where do we need to go? And sometimes I get a lot of clarity, and sometimes I get visions, sometimes it's bodily sensation, sometimes it's nothing. It's just black and pure, you know, I call that like bliss or floating. It's not quite sleeping, but it's not quite awake. And just being able to kind of lean into that. Plus, on top of that, the like education that I've gotten behind the breathwork, the program that I did was super comprehensive from a scientific perspective. So for me, as someone who with a type A personality, a corporate background, details mindset, actually understanding how it works, I was really able to lean into it. And then also the community that came with it too, and seeing, you know, really when you do breath work, and like I've got one coming up in Bondi, and it's amazing every time I do it for a corporate, or I do it not for corporate, for friends, for people at shelter or wherever I am. It's amazing the way you can connect with each other afterwards, because it's almost like you take off your armor and then we're all there together. And it's like, wow, okay, this is what really matters.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what sped up the process for me, was like, okay, this is what really matters. This is where you really want to be. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like you're meeting the person, not just the mask.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you take off the mask.
That people are putting on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to have a follow-up question on that, how would you compare it to meditation? And because like you said, with meditation, Vedic meditation, which we both practice, it's also about, transcending and, getting to that space. Like how would you compare that with breathwork?
Such a good question. So breathwork, we're using the body and the breath to control the mind. Whereas in meditation, any kind of meditation, we're using the mind to control the mind. So with mantra meditation or Vedic meditation, we have a mantra, and that's kind of the mind vehicle that we use to meditate. And it's a beautiful practice, and one that I will never let go of, even doing breath work, because they are still, for me, they're different. And then breath work is, when we give ourselves something to focus on, I think, the breath, and then also we then actually just turn the physiology on. So when you over-oxygenate the body, what happens is the prefrontal cortex comes offline. So the prefrontal cortex is actually your thinking mind. So that's the one that's like, I'm hungry, I've got to eat something, I've got to send that email, I've got to go to this thing, oh my gosh, do I look fat in this? Oh my, is everything okay? So when that comes offline, then you can actually really get into that subconscious and kind of access that peaceful, blissful state, which a lot of people can access in meditation, but a lot of people can't. And I think that that's why breathwork is such a powerful tool, because it's actually giving people the opportunity to reach that meditative state where they feel that they can't meditate. How many times I've done a breathwork session and I've said, how many people in this room think they can't meditate? And they're all the hands go up, or I've tried and I just can't stop thinking. And of course we know that the thoughts, what that all means, and that actually is still meditation, but people get so caught up in that. So we say, okay, let's try breath work, and they're like, whoa, okay. So it's actually giving people access to that beautiful parasympathetic rest and digest blissful state where they can really then connect to themselves and also just process emotions too. I think I've seen so many beautiful moments where people kind of open up and they have visions of things that they hadn't thought about in a really long time, and are able to share. And I think that just makes us vulnerable, but not in a sense that it's dangerous. I think when people hear the word vulnerable, they think, well, I don't want to be vulnerable. That's dangerous. I'm going to get hurt. And it's actually like, well, if you're vulnerable with yourself, then that's how you can get to know yourself even better. And if you're vulnerable with other people, then you're just practicing operating in that space. And that can feel really, really good. Yeah, sounds amazing. I mean, I had Mark Moon, a friend of mine, on here a couple of episodes ago as well, talking about breathwork, and more about that. So, and I've been to one of his sessions, and it was just really interesting to even just hear the different experiences that people have. People have full body experiences, there's sounds, there's noises, there's all sorts of stuff going on because of, the state that you're going into pretty much. And I think it's not some people, because there's a lot of things you can see about breathwork on the internet where, it's people crying or screaming, or that's not how it is all the time. It depends on the practitioner that you go to and what's being called into the space. Like the type of breathwork that I do is, I'm calling in a certain type of energy. So it's like, this is the energy that we want to connect to ourselves. We want to get to know ourselves better. We want to feel what we need to feel. We want to get clarity about where we're going. That's the energy that I'm bringing to my breathwork sessions. And that might not be for everyone. And there might be other breathwork practitioners that are purposely there to help people release trauma or anger. And they really need that. But if you're not one of those people, then I can understand why you might see that on Instagram and be scared of it. But actually just know, if that doesn't call to you, that's okay. There are other types of breath work that can call for you. You just have to find the right practitioner for you. And if you are looking for someone for trauma or anger, there is practitioners for that as well. I think that's probably a big one, because people are like, oh, I saw these really crazy videos and it's scary. It's like, it's not. It doesn't have to be like that.
For them.
Yeah, exactly.
So looking at all the different things that you've done, with the holistic health coaching, the NLP, the breathwork, etc., talk us through that holistic approach and why that holistic approach for you is so important to support your clients with.
Yeah, I love that. And I was just thinking, we kind of stopped on the path. We got a little bit sidetracked. So blending all of those things together has been a really beautiful process. And I think especially a lot of the women that I work with, they're very similar to how I was. They have a lot of armor on them. They're running at 1,000,000 miles a minute. So breathwork has been a fantastic way to kind of cut through some of those layers and help them get closer to themselves. And then from there, we can go into what patterns are you running from a neuro-linguistic programming standpoint, what actual things are coming up for you. I use a lot of IFS, or internal family systems, which is parts work. I practice that myself with a practitioner, and I use that with my coaching clients because that helps you get to know your parts better. And you're not, if you have an anxious part, or you have an angry part, or you have a part that really wants to be loved, it doesn't feel good enough, you have these parts that protect some wounds. And if you know what those parts are, and you can understand how they operate and what they need, and if you can actually give them what they need, then your life can operate at a much more, in like a more seamless way. And I think breathwork's a really great way to connect to some of those parts as well. And then of course there's the movement and the nutrition as well. So there's lots of mindset, lots of breath work, but if you're not moving your body well and connected to your body well, and you're not feeling well in your body, it all falls down. And if you're not eating well, it all falls down too. So I think when I was looking for a coach, I was looking for someone who could help me put the whole picture together, and I didn't really find that. I found it in several different ways, so I ended up working with several different people, but I always really craved someone who would be able to look at the whole picture and say, well, this is kind of where you're falling down, so let's look at that. And this impacts this, so let's put those two things together and make sure we're looking at it from a holistic approach. Because like I said, I was always super passionate about well-being. I would have told you that 10 years ago. But what was well-being to me then? It was smashing berries and monsters and eating salads, And I was not healthy. I was not healthy.
You could have at least drank Red Bull.
Yeah. Well, I really loved a white Monster. White Monster was my thing. I wasn't really into the Red Bulls, and it was just doing more, and making sure my body looked good. And that was really it. Whereas now it's more about how do I feel and kind of the mindset stuff coming in. But it's really hard to have a good mindset when your body doesn't feel good and when you're not taking care of your body. And I think people are easily convinced is probably the wrong word, but we get caught up sometimes in not having a good exercise routine, because once you fall out of shape, it's hard to get back in shape, because then you start to get back in shape and you're exhausted and all that. So actually what works for you and what's the best plan for you that we're going to take. And then also from a food perspective, if people are eating out, they don't have time to cook, they're eating out, they don't necessarily know how to cook, that's a huge barrier to entry to say, okay, now you're going to start meal prepping. So I need you to have 3 hours on a Sunday to... No, that is not how we do it. It's like very small, incremental. What are we going to do? What works for you? I also do hair tissue mineral analysis testing. So we have a look at kind of what's actually going on in your body. So the difference between hair testing and blood testing is hair testing gives you a picture of what's been happening in your body for the last 3 months. Whereas looking at your bloods is kind of what's happening in that moment in time. And not to say that you don't need blood tests. It's a good complement to have. But I think when we think about the body is working super hard to regulate our bloods, actually, if you look at your hair and your minerals, you can see what's been happening. So oftentimes, and more often than not, test the hair of a high-performing woman, and she's like got adrenal fatigue. Now, in my mind, adrenal fatigue, burnout, chronic fatigue, one and the same. So if your adrenals are totally out because your minerals are out, we need to get your minerals back up. So how are we going to do that? With supplementation, with food, and with certain types of exercise. So if you're adrenal fatigued, I'm not going to be sending you to a spin class or a HIIT class. We're going to be working on ways to actually really calm your nervous system, building in breathwork practices to get your nervous system back online. So I think it's really bespoke the way that I work with each of my clients. They're all at different phases. They're all wanting different things, but it's the same toolkit. And then the toolkit gets applied at different times, different intensities for different reasons.
And the toolkit, you call it the ambitiously balanced method, is it? I love that.
Because if we're so ambitious about promotions and external achievements and all these things, but if you just become ambitiously balanced in yourself, everything else falls into place.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I really love that. So you've just taught us so beautifully about, how you're working with your clients so that they can really reach their balanced life in whatever industry or job or work they're in. What does growth look like for you right now, and how are you keeping up with the times, so to speak.
Yeah.
How are you, like, what does it look like to you right now?
Yeah, I love that. And I think growth, I think like I said earlier, growth for me is how well do I know myself and how well am I taking action in alignment with how well I know myself. And kind of the way I describe it now is if I had a cup that had a bunch of rocks in it before, so let's say, toxic relationship with work, toxic relationship with my body, I definitely have had some issues with that, toxic relationships that I was in with friends or, drinking or, take all of those big rocks out, not sleeping much, all those big rocks are out. So now I've got this cup that just has sand in it and I'm trying to pick up the sand with chopsticks. And I feel like that is my growth now. It's like, okay, I've got these little bits of sand that I'm trying to, what are they? I can't really see them. I know there's something there that I want to move through. What is it? And it's kind of seeing and finding those unconscious patterns that I'm running and how can I stop those patterns earlier. And that's something that I do a lot with my clients, but it's something that never ends. So even for me personally, and I've got a coach and I've got a therapist and I've got a support network and, all of those things. So growth for me is just how can I feel better in my body and in the things that I'm doing that are in alignment with myself every day. And I think a funny story that I know we talked about, it's funny now, it wasn't funny at the time, that we talked about when I was in India recently. And, this idea of flowing more than I'm forcing. And I went traveling recently and I've had a lot of big changes in my life. I went through a breakup and went traveling and met a new partner and everything, all these things were happening quite quickly for me. And it just felt like a rapid growth period. Yeah. And I was really leaning into it. And I ended up in India. So I went to a 2-week holiday to Raja Ampat. And then I ended up going to India for 4 weeks and traveling around India. And I thought with no spreadsheet, didn't really know where I was going, what I was doing. No spreadsheet. I love it. If anyone who's ever traveled with me, they know itinerary spreadsheet that has like day, date, time, where we're going, accommodation, how much is owed to who, what's the activity we're going to do, what time is sunrise, what time is sunset, like you name it, it's in this freaking spreadsheet. But maybe the spreadsheet's dead now. I don't know. I haven't had one in a while. I'm not going to have one for my next trip that I take either. But I was really flowing through India and I was really enjoying it. I was like, this is what it feels like to just trust and see what happens and what comes up. And actually it works really well. You don't need to have everything planned to the minute. But what ended up happening when I was leaving India was I actually overstayed my visa by 1 day. And there was something in me a couple of days before we were leaving that just said, check your visa. And I was like, nah, I entered on the 4th. I'm leaving on the 3rd. It's 30-day visa. It's fine. Didn't check it. Got to the airport. Lo and behold, I was like 10 hours over my visa exit time and they really put me through the works. I had to stay. Wow. And I also had a parasite at the time. So I was quite sick and I just wanted to get out of there. I wanted to leave on the same flight as my partner and go meet my sister in Europe. And it was just really, it ended up being really dramatic and I couldn't quite get over it or let go of it, at least not in the moment. And I had gotten really good at in the last 2 years or 18 months of like letting things roll and letting go of, but this thing I couldn't let go of. And, once I had gone through the immigration and sat in the office and gone through all the, the drama of filling out the exit applications and all of that stuff and feeling like, oh my gosh, this is a mess. I had some time and I pulled out my journal, which old Vic wouldn't have done. But what I realized was old Vic would have never missed her visa date. Mm-hmm. And there was some kind of battle that happened in myself, which was like, I let you have this flowy time and then, oh, look what happened. You weren't paying attention. You screwed up this detail and look at this mess. So there was this kind of process of really beating myself up for that, even though it manifested as something different. It showed itself as me being really unwell, sad, annoyed, disappointed. But it was actually when I really took a step back, I was just disappointed at myself. Yeah. So that was a really good growth experience for me, even though it was painful at the time. But it was like, how can you actually shift this and realize, it's a very expensive mistake that you've made, but what have you learned from this? And being more compassionate with myself in that process. But it just felt like, and I guess like, why did I choose this example is it just felt like in that moment, it was like old Vic and new Vic were there together and they weren't really sure how to interact with each other. So for me, since that point, which was a couple of months ago now, has been how can I actually merge the two together, because they both bring something amazing to my life, like old corporate intense Vic and new, my therapist calls her Bondi Vic.
I love it.
And she's been working with me since I was at Blue It long before, so she actually has been on the journey. How can I blend them together? And that's kind of where I'm at right now, is what can I take and keep, and what can I bring in new, and how can I merge those two versions of myself together to create the version that I'm becoming.
I love that, and it just shows so beautifully as well that, like you said before, the work is never over, right? Like once you open that box, there is like no going back, I always find, because it's so easy to kind of put things aside and not look at them and, think I'll deal with that tomorrow. But once you start looking at that, once you start looking at yourself and you start to dive deep, there is really just no end to it, I think, and your whole life will be a continuation of, growing and evolving and learning and, making mistakes and standing up again and, and like you said, there might not be huge rocks anymore, but there will still be like little sand horns that you have to eliminate on the way.
Exactly. And even hearing you say that, we both know that's so true. But I think some people get deterred by that fact and they think, oh, that sounds scary or exhausting, but it's definitely a worthwhile process.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think it can be scary and exhausting at times, and I think that's part of the work and that's part of the growth. But I think what's on the other side, the liberation and the freedom and the, joy of it outweighs everything else that comes before, and it's just so worthwhile doing the work,
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, last question. How important do you think that deep personal and collective healing is in the world that we live in right now?
Oh gosh, 10 out of 10, 12 out of 10, important. And this kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, is when we heal the individual, we heal the collective. So you always, and even when we did our neuro-linguistic programming, they say apply to self first and then help others. So the more we fill our cups, the more energy we have, the more we can actually bring to other people. And you never know who you're inspiring. So if you go and start doing the work on yourself or start thinking about things in a different way, you never know who is watching you and then might do the same. And the more of us that explore the deeper realms of ourselves, the better everything's going to become, because that's where the real magic is, when we can connect with each other on a real interpersonal human level. And in order to be able to connect with others, we first have to connect with ourselves. But if we're too afraid to look, or don't have time to look, or we think it's not necessary to look, then if we're not connected to us, we can't connect to others. And that's where I think that's the healing of all of humankind. If we can just connect to each other, then all of these questions kind of start to fall away, wars and, racism and things like that. If we can just connect with each other a bit better and find love for ourselves, then we have a bigger capacity to love others. And that is the most important thing. Yeah.
I love that so much. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was an absolute pleasure. I do have to go on a call at 5. That's why we do have to stop now. Otherwise, we would probably keep talking. But it has been just absolutely wonderful to, sit down with you after having known you for a couple of years and having witnessed your journey, and actually sitting down with you and having that conversation on a deeper level has just been beautiful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. Loved it.
So the 3 pearls of wisdom that I'm taking away from today. The first one is that, stop chasing the things that you are chasing just for the sake of it, or just because other people are chasing it, because, they might not be the right things for you. And I think what comes in here, which is a really good message, is, changing the definition of growth, and how well you knowing yourself is actually way more important, because once you know yourself and once you know where you want to go and what you want to do and what you want to achieve in this life, everything else falls into place as well, and you actually stop going after the things that are not really meant for you. The second one is, you can enjoy life. You're not slacking off because you're enjoying it. Enjoying your life and enjoying your time here on this beautiful earth is actually a really important thing, because the happier you are and the more fulfilled you are, the more you're putting that out into the world as well, and therefore supporting other people and kind of creating that ripple effect in your surroundings as well. And the third thing is, looking at the holistic approach and knowing that not one thing is gonna save the day, so to speak. Like, you might be meditating all day long and that's really good for your mind, but if you don't move your body, something's gonna suffer at some point. Or if you don't eat well, something's gonna suffer at some point. So the holistic approach that Victoria is looking at is really important in order for you to really live a balanced and fulfilled life. And I think what comes into that message as well is the fact that, if we heal the individual, we also heal the collective, because what we then bring out into the world actually creates that ripple effect around us once again. Awesome. So, Victoria, if people feel really inspired and, want to change their lives around and be a better version of themselves in 2025, how can they find you? How can they work with you?
Yeah. So finding me on Instagram is probably one of the best ways. So it's at The Balanced Corporate. And that's where I post all of my events, and I'll share about my group coaching program that's launching in January of next year. And I've got my website linked there as well, which is thebalancedcorporate.com, where you can apply to work with me one-on-one or apply into my group coaching program that will launch in January. So yeah, keep in touch with me that way. Send me a message on Instagram if you found this episode interesting, and I would love to chat. Also, if you live in the East, I teach at Shelter in Double Bay, so come to me for a class or come to one of my breathwork events in Bondi.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, do get in touch with Victoria if what you've heard today inspired you, and if you want to really revolutionize your life and start a new year with a bit more pep in your step, so to speak. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I really hope you got something out of this episode today. Please do share the podcast with your family, with your friends, or anyone you think might benefit from what we have discussed today. I really hope this episode brought some sunshine to your soul. I'm sending love and light your way, and until next time.